Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I figured I'd give you an update on everything that's going on with my husband and his job search, and also some, I'd say, pretty exciting news for me as well. Okay, so first and foremost, we got word last week that he did not get the Indiana gig, and then the railroad in Wyoming actually gave him an offer. Now, as I mentioned before, the railroad gig in Wyoming would definitely be a huge change of pace in comparison to what my husband was doing. It would be a pretty significant pay cut, and also they did not offer any relocation package. But at the time, it was the only offer on the table. So my husband, before formally accepting the offer, said to me, "Let me drive you out there, show you the area, make sure you like it." This part of Wyoming is about 3.5 hours west of us. And it's interesting because on the drive out there, if I'm being honest, I was definitely getting some jitters just because the topography is such a stark contrast to where we are now. As you guys know, we're in the middle of the national forest in western South Dakota. So obviously we're in the Black Hills. It's very mountainous. And as you come out of South Dakota into Wyoming, it is like someone flipped a switch. It's all grassland in eastern Wyoming. And don't get me wrong, it's very beautiful. It's just a different type of topography, but you legit will drive like 50, 70 miles and not see a single tree. So it's very, very different from where we live. But as we started getting closer to the town my husband would be working in, you started getting more like rolling hills, more treed areas, these really beautiful rock formations, which was very encouraging. The town in which he'd be working is super cute. It's a very humble, small mountain town, which obviously we're fine with. And then from there, we drove out to this community that we had looked at online because it seemed to epitomize a similar vibe to what we have here. And I was kind of laughing because as we were driving out there, we had to access this community via a 21-mile long dirt and gravel road, which again, I'm loving. To give you some perspective, where we live now is about 6 miles off the asphalt down a dirt and gravel road. So it's like, whoa, 21 miles versus 6 miles. Like you're definitely going deep, which is ironically something I've been praying about. Just, you guys know how much we love living here. You know how soul satisfying this area is for me. But even like before all this job stuff happened, I would pray to God, like, please take us deeper, more rural, more mountains, like more remote. And I was kind of laughing because as we were driving, I could feel the Lord saying to my, heart, like, well, you said you wanted to go deep. So I'm taking you deep. This community, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. There's only about 50 people that live there. There are beautiful views of the Laramie Mountains. And then all around this little cabin in particular, we had kind of honed in on beautiful wooded areas, footpaths everywhere, beautiful mountain streams, these little hidden mountain lakes. Just like, oh my gosh, if we are to move, this is like definitely representative of where I'd want to go, where my husband would want to go as well. So from there, we kind of drove out a little further west to Casper, which I had never been to Casper, Wyoming before, but it's a super cute town, great vibe. And then from there, we drove up into the Casper Mountains where there were a couple other properties that were of interest to us. And that was what an experience. That is the real deal mountain living up there. They still had 3 feet of snow on the ground. Some of the roads were just closed for the winter. So that was really, really interesting and fun to see. So the final step my husband took before formally accepting this offer in Wyoming was to drive back out there and just to look at a couple apartments for him. We have decided we don't want to live, like him in one area working, and then when he's off to come home to me here. Like we want to be together. But obviously, if we're selling the house, that's not going to happen overnight. And he will need a place to stay while he is working, should he accept the job. I'm in my mind just really accepting the idea of moving, feeling myself getting excited about it, thinking about this little mountain community that I just described. Like, what an amazing place to be in. And all of a sudden, again, as my husband's on the road driving to Wyoming, he gets a call from that railroad in Arizona. To be honest with you, when he stopped to tell me he got a call from them, in my mind I was thinking, I really wish they hadn't called, because to me, I knew it was going to muddy the waters. I mentioned in the last video that we had basically kind of closed the door ourselves on the whole Arizona opportunity, just because after the initial interview with my husband, which went really, really well, they just got flaky and they'd schedule a second interview and then not call, and then they'd go MIA and then they'd pop up again. So at this point, it had been about like 2 weeks since my husband had even heard from them. So we were like, well, okay, not meant to be, whatever. Here they are popping on the radar again. To their credit, the GM apologized profusely for going MIA, for that, for that flakiness, for being inconsistent. He was very honest and said, I am just completely overwhelmed in this role. He kind of stepped into this role, in the absence of an actual operations manager for this railroad. So, he's just in over his head, and he said as much, which obviously is one of the reasons why they're looking to hire somebody like my husband to come in. So initially my husband was like, what do you want to do? My advice to him, and what I immediately started thinking, was proceed with caution, right? Like we've talked about before, the track record with this railroad hasn't exactly been reliable, consistent, obviously giving them the benefit of the doubt, considering the apology and the reasoning they gave us. So it was like, well, you haven't formally accepted the offer in Wyoming. To be honest, like, it's not a job that's really going to fulfill you creatively. It's a job and we'd be thankful for it. So why not just see what Arizona has to offer? They also offered to fly me and my husband down, all expense paid trip, to meet with them in person, see the area, which I thought was really great. And then the other reason we decided to proceed with this interview in Arizona is that the job itself would definitely be a step up for my husband. I think he'd really do well in this job. He'd thrive in this environment. His skills would shine for sure. The pay is also a little bit better. And then the retirement package is also more appealing and definitely more lucrative for this job versus what we would get in Wyoming. So this railroad is based in the Sedona area, like around Prescott Valley as well, kind of situated between the two. So that is where we will be this Thursday through Sunday. Now, an exciting thing that happened for me is that I did get a request to interview for a job this coming Monday, and I'm really excited about it because, to be honest with you, out of all those applications I've been sending out myself, this was the one I was most excited about. It would actually be for a styling role, and this would not involve subscription boxes. This would be legit, like hands-on virtually, but hands-on one-to-one personal styling. And so that in and of itself excites me. Plus, I think there's a lot of room for creativity that would come along with this job as well. So, obviously it's just an interview. I haven't gotten an offer, but to me, it was so exciting just to see like some type of movement in my own job search. I mentioned before that I do have a job now. It's about 30 hours a week, but it's pretty unfulfilling at this point. So to me, just like anything that represents some type of forward movement is always like that shimmer of hope and that encouragement that you need in times like this. So how am I feeling about everything at this point? Okay, so I mentioned in the last video that one thing I'm becoming very aware of is that sometimes you have to release your grip on something in order to open your hand to receive the blessing and the gift that God is giving you. That being said, God's way of doing that does not always make sense. These are definitely times where you question, like, why? I mentioned before, coming out here to South Dakota was a 15-year process for us, in the sense that my husband had been putting his application in for 15 years because his dream was to live here in the Black Hills. And finally in 2020, we get an offer. So we've been here 4 years. And so you just wonder, like, well, like, God, you orchestrated everything beautifully to move us out here. Why? Like, after just 4 years, you're moving us out? It doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense. All I can say is at this point, I've accepted the fact that this is happening for a reason, right? I can only see so far into the future. My vision is limited. God can see well into the future. He can see something that might be coming at us that he's trying to protect us from. I think my job right now is to trust God and his reasoning. I also have become very aware that in any situation that is not pleasant or that is hard, really I get to and we get to choose how we're going to react to that situation, right? Like right now, and as I mentioned before, the struggle has been, to maintain a good attitude and to not choose to dread, to fear, to get angry, but instead to, choose hope, choose excitement. And even saying that, that doesn't mean I'm never going to have periods where I experience those understandable and natural emotions, that get tied into a situation like this. But at the end of the day, it's deciding, okay, I'll accept the fact that those emotions are going to come. They're natural. I can process them. I can manage them with God's help. But the ultimate goal is not to park at the point of my pain. What I also am starting to love about this situation is that it gives me an opportunity to stop focusing on the fear and start focusing on God's faithfulness. Looking back on my own life, I've seen that faithfulness play out time and time again. He has never let me down. And that's also one of the reasons why I love reading all your encouraging comments, hearing your own stories, because I can see that faithfulness playing out in your life as well. And when you start looking at all of that, that just keeps you so encouraged and so full of hope that, like, God's not going to leave us hanging here. Like, he has a plan. It might not look the way we look. It might not be what we want it to be, but he has a plan for us, and that plan is good. That doesn't mean the situation isn't going to be hard. It's going to be hard. That doesn't mean the situation is going to be easy. It's probably not going to be easy. But in every hard situation in my life, in every tough time, like in the worst, God has always brought his best. And I am, again, just like reflecting on that in my own life, reflecting on that in your life, holding on to that hope, holding on to that promise. And also just looking at our situation from day one of this job loss, there has been an unexplainable peace, joy, unity on this house. There's been agreement, there's been laughter, there's been love. And I think that's interesting, the fact that we are going through this turmoil, this unexpected traumatic event, yet through it all, God brought his best with all of those beautiful blessings. Finally, for me, I think one of the revelations I've been savoring is looking back on 2023. I mentioned before feeling like God basically put me on a shelf. When I say opportunities started drying up, doors started closing, I cannot emphasize enough how isolated I was becoming in terms of work, opportunity. It was like I was basically left bare bones, so to say, with a lot of time on my hands. And at times it felt like I was beating my head against the door, trying to create opportunities that just weren't happening. And so I had made the decision pretty early on in January of 23 that I was going to use all this time to just lean into God, focus on myself, work on issues that I was having. I mentioned before, struggling with things like jealousy, insecurity, really focusing too much on money, how much money I was making, how much money my husband was making, how much money we had in savings. It was literally never enough. I never felt like we had enough, despite how many blessings we were being given. So in hindsight, all the fighting I did with God, wrestling with this, being put on a shelf, why? You've blessed me with all this creativity, all this creative talent, yet nothing is panning out in a big way. It was like little piecemeal things, you know what I'm saying? Like no big, like, wow, success moment was happening for me. But now in hindsight, I realize he was clearing all that out in order to draw me in, right? It's like God underwhelms your schedule so he can overwhelm your soul. I've heard Lisa Turkhurst say that before, and I love that mentality because that is absolutely what he was doing for me. I know it without a doubt. He was essentially preparing me for this season. Had I not had that beautiful time with him to really soak in his words, soak in his promises, work through things with him without any other distractions, I can tell you I would not have been readily prepared to deal with this situation in a positive, hopeful manner. And I think the ripple effect of that would have been pretty severe, not only on my outlook and attitude, but certainly the outlook and attitude I shared with my husband. I think that would have just created like a really negative energy and space in this house as well. And again, what I love about this is like now I get it, and I realize I would rather have 5 minutes alone with God than have a six-figure salary. I'd rather have 10 minutes of walking with him through these beautiful woods versus having a successful YouTube channel and basically being chained to, creating constantly across multiple platforms. To me, it's just not worth it. So I think that in and of itself represents a tremendous amount of growth for me to have experienced in a year. And that is only because of God's grace and his willingness to meet me where I was at, to work with me on these different issues, and to really bless me with a heart that, yes, fought him and argued with him pretty intensely, but ultimately was willing to accept that, hey, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. Having a lot of time just to like hang out and chill with God and to talk to him openly and honestly. I can tell you my relationship with him has never been better. And I think that's really cool. I mentioned Lisa Turkhurst earlier. If you guys have never seen this devotion from her, it's called Embraced, 100 Devotions to Know God is Holding You Close. I highly recommend you check this out. My mom sent this to me pretty soon after my husband lost his job, and it has been a godsend. I feel like God is just speaking to me personally through her words and through her daily verses that she gives to each devotion. It's so good. Like, even if you're not going through a hard, difficult time, I just recommend this book. It's so good. But today's verse in particular, I wanted to share with you because it just like sung to my soul and my heart. And it's from Hebrews 13:5-6. And it says, God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. So you can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. And I just, as I said, I read that and my heart just started singing because it's exactly what I needed to hear. And so for me, that is one of the key verses I'm really going to start leaning into and standing on as we navigate through all of this. But in any event, thank you guys so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you're having a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.